Okay, warm welcome to the iTOO brokers and our colleagues and customers of Armata Cybersecurity to this red couch conversation, which is about protecting your business against cyber risks. We've got an hour together, and it's going to be a very meaningful discussion facilitated by myself, Caesar Tonkin. I'm the managing director of Armata Cybersecurity. Richard Frost, who is the head of cyber security consulting at Armata. And of course, you all know Ryan van der Kulwijk very well from iTOO, and we look forward to their insights. So today's session is about protecting your business against cyber attacks, and the two panelists will share invaluable insights in this groundbreaking fireside chat. Before we kick off, I'd like to ask Ryan just to briefly introduce himself, then Richard.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time available this morning. My name is Ryan van der Kulwijk. I am the cluster head for cyber insurance, collectible insurance, and digital distribution at iTOO. Been involved in the cyber insurance market for the last 10 years or so. I'm going to give away my age. Started cyber insurance at Hollard and then part of the iTOO fold from there. So lovely to have you all with us this morning and looking forward to a good conversation.
Thank you, Ryan. We really appreciate your time, and most importantly, you are a peer in the cybersecurity community more than just being part of the insurance world, and that's why we really appreciate all the wonderful words of inspiration and guidance that you provide. Richard, briefly introduce, please.
Thanks, Caesar. Hi, yeah, I'm Richard Frost. I'm the head of consulting at Armata Cybersecurity. Unlike our youngster Ryan, I've been in the industry now 27 years. So I'm really giving away my age. I've been all over the industry from, basic networking through systems administration and through into cybersecurity, which is giving me a lot of insight into the different areas of system informations. And the passion for cybersecurity has always been there, from day one, running my first sniffer trace and being able to see things that I probably shouldn't have been able to see. It's just kind of like sparked that whole interest in cybersecurity. And really great to be working with a large organization like iTOO, matching the two worlds of cyber insurance and cybersecurity beautifully. And we're looking really forward to this presentation today.
Thanks, Richard. And Caesar Tonkin is my name. I've been in the industry for the last 14 years. I've been a chief information security officer at a global level and local in 3 organizations, and I've led as executive head 3 companies which are niche cybersecurity companies, and it's a real privilege to be able to spend time with you. So straight away into the session. This is, as I said, a discussion as opposed to us doing presentations, and it's really important when we say a fireside chat. It is a chat. And I'm going to ask Richard and Ryan as our panelists a few questions, up to 5, maybe 6, depending on how time goes. And we're really looking forward to some of their insights. So I will facilitate the discussion. The first question I have to both Richard and Ryan is, what is the one major insight on the nature of evolving cyber security risks facing businesses in 2024? Really keen to hear your thoughts and guidance. Firstly, Ryan?
So mine, I suppose, is framed a lot by what we've seen from a claims perspective within the cyber insurance landscape. And the one thing that we see coming through quite often is that if you get the basics right consistently, you can go a very long way to either reducing your chances of suffering an incident or your likelihood and ability to recover from that incident. A lot of the incidents we see are where there has been a breakdown on controls, and I suppose it creates a very difficult scenario for IT security teams, because you ultimately have to be right and on point and getting things right every single time, whereas for a hacker, they only have to get lucky or get through once. So something like a missing patch, which is easy to fall through in a wider environment, and with a plethora of patches we're seeing coming through nowadays, that's the one that gets compromised. The one employee who clicks on a phishing mail and provides their credentials. Those are the things which we see often resulting in incidents. So I would say that a very big sort of mechanism to be able to better safeguard yourself is just trying to get those basics right, get them right consistently. It does go a long way to protecting against attacks.
Thanks, Ryan. Richard, your thoughts?
So I think one of the things that I've seen a lot happening this year is how the information regulator is front on mind when there is a cyber attack. In the old days, when you had something like ransomware, you were focused on restoring your systems and trying to limit the damage to the company itself. Now, there's the first question we get asked is, was data exfiltrated? Did somebody actually get access to my personal information and steal it, right? Did they get access to client information and steal that? And I think this is starting to show how the regulators, starting to bear their teeth. People are now starting to focus more on protecting, people's data that they're storing, and getting the correct controls in place to secure the data has become more front of mind. We didn't really have anybody to answer to other than our customers when data was stolen, and that's no longer the case. We've noticed personally within business as well, a lot more people starting to do these gap assessments on their cybersecurity risk, looking to see, based on an ISO framework, how their risk or how that gap is actually covered. And then we're advising them on a roadmap to resolve it. And we're seeing a lot more of this, which means people are definitely standing to attention more and focusing on protecting client information.
Thanks, Richard. The one insight that I also have, in the last 6 months, we have assisted 3 customers in defending against a ransom attack, such as Lockbit, or helping them to do a further compromise assessment to make sure that their previous cleaning up containment of the ransom attack was really successful and effective, that it didn't come back as round 2 on them. And as a result, in the one global manufacturing business that we assisted, we took them from no endpoint detection response as a solution that was implemented to really take them to an advanced capability to defend against and proactively mitigate against a ransom attack. That thereafter they combined endpoint detection response and vulnerability management and patch management into a comprehensive outsourced service from us. And it's because they realized they didn't have those basics and advanced capability in place. And that particular global manufacturing company, we've said to iTOO that they're really interested in cyber insurance. So that was a striking moment to say, from an Armata business, we really need to form a partnership with iTOO, because we see incredible synergy that we can't separate cyber security, all of the security operations that we do with customers, from cyber insurance. Hence why we're talking in this seminar. Maybe a few more points from yourself, Ryan, if you have any others. Otherwise, we'll get to question 2.
No, that's some really good points. Just to unpack what Richard was saying is, we've definitely seen the information regulator baring their teeth and maturing a bit more over the last year and a half or so. On the insurance side, we've been notifying the regulator of incidents for probably the best part of the last 4 years or so. For the first initial year or 2, it's kind of like you'd sent an email off into file 13. So you'd notify the regulator to make sure that you ticked the box and done what you needed to, but then never heard anything back from there. That sort of evolved to the regulator responding with the questionnaire, looking to better understand what did the environment look like at the time of the incident. And we've now had a number of our insured where the regulator's gone to pay visit subsequently to interrogate and understand the environment, what sort of measures have been implemented post-incident to try and prevent a reoccurrence. And one thing that I can say is that those teams that the regulator has put on the ground have been really good, very professional, asking some very deep probing questions. So the regulator is look like they're gearing up and they're on top of the game. And while that might be a daunting prospect for businesses, if we look at the overall economy, I think it's probably a positive thing. We are part of a global digital economy. And in order to be seen as a proper player in the global space, we do need to have privacy legislation that kind of tracks along or tries to imitate what you see coming out of Europe with GDPR of the US. So important to see the regulator baring their teeth. We think it's important that we work closely with them.
Lovely, Ryan. Okay, I'm going to move on to question 2. You can always weave any further comments on question 1 into question 2. So, starting with Richard, what forms of proactive cybersecurity measures are businesses adopting to mitigate against these evolving cybersecurity risks that we are aware of?
Yeah, Caesar, I think one of the big things we've noticed is obviously the addition of AI into forms of cyber attacks. And I think if you look at traditional endpoint security that clients do have, they are not capable of defending against these AI-based attacks. So you're starting to see a lot more people looking at products like endpoint detect and response, your next generation endpoint protection software. So products like Sentinel-1 that we utilize as an EDR platform start looking at application behavior. So it's not your traditional anti-malware, antivirus, that companies are using. They're starting to do proactive services as well with the application behavior analysis, things like active threat hunting. So if you think about your typical ransomware, most people would say, I've been hit by a ransomware, I'm under attack, and they'll start acting immediately to that. What we've found a lot of the times is that ransomware or that malware is actually being in the environment for months. It could be almost 180 days plus before we even detect it, right? And it's busy exfiltrating data, it's stealing data from your network. So unless you're doing something like an active threat hunt, you would not see that malware is actually in your environment. It's only at the time of encryption that you actually then realize, there's actually a problem. And by then it's too late, right? That's the last step that happens in that whole process. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we're seeing is definitely the endpoint detect and response. And then around your data discovery, classification, and control, a lot more people are starting to look at technologies that do that form of, data leak prevention. Who has got access to my data, and do they have permission, to have access? How do we control access, and how do we control, what gets sent where? That seems to be front of mind on customers' minds at the moment.
Thanks, Richard. There was a lot to digest. Right, your take?
So a lot of good points about today. I'll try not to rehash some of them. We've seen, I guess, and I'm almost going to take 2 or 3 steps back because I think we're seeing an evolution, and I want to almost talk through the storyline of that. So we saw a big change when lockdown struck and companies had to go remote. So if we look at the insured and the sort of submissions that we see and the trends coming through from there, we found a lot of the technologies around better protecting remote workforces starting to come through. So things like better endpoint protection, Richard spoke to EDR, starting to filter through with the understanding that my laptop is now no longer sitting behind the company firewall all the time. I could be sitting at home connected to the internet. I could be in a coffee shop, etc. So we need to better protect these devices. There's obviously all the abilities in EDR with its ability to do behavioral analysis and identify something that seems malicious and close it down. So that's been a big trend that we've seen being rolled out. Better endpoint protection. We've also seen a big focus on resilience. So making sure that you have your immutable backups or your disconnected backups, that in the event of an incident and your data is encrypted, you have got secure that you can roll back to, which is a good development to see. If we go to the past 6, it'll ensure that when they were hit by a ransomware attack, their backups were connected. They lost their backups as well, and that left them in a very compromised and difficult position. What we started to see is better adoption of something like multi-factor authentication. We see so many incidents caused by simple credentials. Things like password 123, name, exclamation mark, the year, are still widely used. So MFA, while it's not completely infallible, and I suppose that is a new act that we're developing, is the capturing of those MFA flags so that they can be used for authentication afterwards. It's still a big step in the right direction. So we're seeing more adoption of MFA to try and secure the remote connections to the environment, try to just sort of around the fact that people are going to use simple passwords, and there's not a great deal you can do about that. I think those are probably 3 of the things that we've seen a lot of focus. I would throw in the patching as well. So we see more focus on patching.
think we just lost Ryan.
Okay. Richard, do you just take it away with, and then we'll come to Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to add on to what Ryan was saying, I mean, I 100% agree with the whole digital revolution, particularly caused by COVID. And what we've also had as a negative impact as well is load shedding. So not only have you been trying to work from home because of COVID, but we have load shedding, so people end up at a coffee shop, and now you've got more risk there as well. There's the whole joke about, you know, who sped up your digital transformation in the organization. Was it the CEO, the CFO, the CIO? COVID, and then, you know, people were taking COVID. So, you know, I think our data is more risk because of the fact that we are in the cloud. And like Ryan was saying, you know, it's easier to access the data once it's in the cloud because you don't have all those controls in place like you would if you had your own office. Ryan, are you back and functional?
I don't know what happened. Our team Zoom shut down and sort of broke on again. I do see back and functional. Apologies for that. One of the other things, and Rich for jumping in while I disappeared into the one of the things I want to touch on is how we've seen these changes to try and be more robust. And I suppose the big focus against ransomware, the impact that we've seen claims trend.
I don't have to be somebody of influence. Information about the company that's changed, somebody's going to go open that attachment and be infected by malware. So I think there's a lot more risk now with people working from home, with people working out on the streets. I mean, even within the insurance game, right? Everybody here understands the concept of a broker, and the brokers are always, you know, meeting with customers on site. They've always been on a sort of a hybrid, you know, working on the road, or working at the customer, working at the office. So your cybersecurity actually almost needs to move with the user, not just be segmented to just the office, if that makes sense.
No, it does. So the one thing before we ask Ron to further comment, the one thing in my view, and you both kind of said, is that increasingly companies, whether it's a small business or a large global multinational, they all have the same objective in mind, making sure we get the basics right and being ready to commit to much more advanced cyber defenses so that we are reactive and proactive. Knowing that you can have all the basics in place, that means patching, running updates, checking for vulnerabilities, implementing multi-factor authentication, and a whole of other security policies, including against data exfiltration of sensitive person identifiable information or sensitive commercial information. That's the basics. And then even more advanced cyber defense, which is a security operations center, 8x5 or 24x7, plus an EDR threat hunting capability, and you can do all of that. You can still be attacked, but the chances are significantly reduced if you've got the basics and the advanced in place. And then it comes down to your resilience, which is what Ryan was talking about. How do you respond? And that's where incident response, complemented by a cyber insurance policy, really makes a big difference in terms of being proactive. Ryan, are you back? You want to share some more learnings with us, please?
I am indeed sorry about that. We had load shedding and then the Wi-Fi as it went over. So I am back, and hopefully back for good. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on is just that where we've seen this focus now on protecting against ransomware for your more sort of entry-level hackers, I think those attacks have become harder to perpetrate. So we've seen a massive transition across now to business email compromise attacks, which has now become the biggest cause of attacks. Not the most expensive, but the most frequent incidents seeing is business email compromise. I think that invoices and have people transfer funds around to the incorrect accounts to get people to divulge information that they wouldn't normally do. So BEC, I think, is probably a new frontier that we need to just look at addressing via things like awareness training, mail security tools to try and prevent the spoofing of mail addresses, how we communicate things like invoices around to try and prevent the manipulation of those. Now, that's kind of the new evolving threat that we see. Not that ransomware has gone away. We tend to see it a little bit more focused, but BEC is very widespread and prominent at the moment.
Great. I'm going to go on to the next question, and if you still want to give further insight in terms of proactive measures, you're welcome to weave it into the next question, because it is related. Starting with Richard, why is the link between outsourced cyber security services with an SLA and having cyber insurance so business critical? Why did we form this partnership is the other way of asking the question. Richard?
Well, Caesar, I think there's a couple of factors to it. I always talk about the concept of cybersecurity being that mechanism, or the combination of the people, the processes, and the technology. And it's true that having a firewall without people and processes to manage it, it's basically just a device that's sitting there, right? It's set up once and it just does its thing. By having an SLA version of a service running, you ensuring that if something does happen, there's some form of a response to that fault happening. So somebody's there to come and resolve it as quickly as possible. There's an actual time measurement that says, I have to respond to this within 30 minutes. I need to try and resolve it within 2 hours, or at least give the client an update. So you have that sense of comfort that somebody is actually proactively doing something about the situation, right? For the insurer, what's great by working with a company that offers this SLA-based managed service, they know that the customers have got some form of risk mitigation in place, all right? That means there's less chances of a claim happening. But the converse as well, that when there is a claim, if that same person is doing a form of incident response, they know that the guys are going to try and resolve that issue as quickly as possible, which means the cost of resolving that breach will be a lot less, all right? So effectively, the partnership is that if you look at it from a risk perspective of moving from west to east, the more you move from left to right, the more expensive it becomes to resolve the issue. If you're putting proactive services in place, you can sort of stop the breach as close to the start as possible. It means that it's going to cost you a lot less to fix, and a lot less time to fix. So your downtime is down, the cost of the breach is less. The insurer is happier because he doesn't have to pay out as much. The customer is happier because his business is up and running quicker. What's nice for us is the fact that we also understand that clients don't always have money to pay for things like digital forensics, right? But having cyber insurance that will cover that, the client gets paid by the insurer, or should I say the person providing that service will get paid by the insurer. So there's that level of comfort of knowing that if something does go wrong, you'll have the funds available to get your business up and running as quickly as possible.
So, Richard, a subset of that question is in the Armata all-in-one managed cybersecurity service, what's included in terms of the service outcome and etc.? Do you want to answer that?
Allows us to be more aggressive on the pricing front of things. And it starts putting cyber insurance as part of a holistic risk offering, which has always been kind of, how I've always wanted to see cyber insurance positioned, not as a replacement to security, but as part of this holistic risk offering where the pieces work together, and your cyber insurance almost becomes the safety net of if something slips through, and then it comes to the rescue of the client with the right controls to impact and minimize the damages, to then try and put a client in the best position possible. Cyber insurance, I've always said, is quite an interesting line of insurance because it's the interests of the insured and the insurer are very closely aligned. While the insurance provides a lot of valuable benefits, you still never want to be compromised. So having robust security is of paramount importance because, if you have an incident, yes, the insurance is there to help you out, but you still potentially suffer this damage to your reputation and things. So having them combined like that is of paramount importance.
So I'm going to skip to the next question, one question further, which is about what actually goes into a typical cyber insurance policy. And I'm certainly on those who've not dealt with iTOO, and that's a lot of the Armata customers in this session. It's really going to be very useful to educate them what actually is involved in a cyber insurance policy, typically. Thanks.
Sure, thanks. It's a great question, and there is a lot. So it might be a little bit of an information dump, but there is material that we can share afterwards, which can sort of be used to refresh. I think one of the big things I wanted to sort of bring forward first is that this name cyber insurance is fantastic from a marketing and a brand perspective, because the name cyber has all sorts of scary connotations attached to it, but doesn't fully encapsulate what the insurance policy provides in totality. So while probably better thought of a system and data insurance, which is nowhere near as sexy from a marketing campaign, that is more what it is. So the two triggering kind of conditions on the policy is a network security breach and a privacy breach. And particularly here, when you go to a privacy breach, you start to see just how broad this policy gets, because you now open up the realm to employees acting in an unauthorized manner. We've had several claims where employees have actually stolen data from their employer with legitimate access to the systems and the data that they had, and now have tried to extort them or have sold this information off on for a profit. You start opening up where if my laptop, for example, is lost or stolen, there could be sensitive data on this, and that could then result in a breach of the privacy of information and trigger a cyber insurance policy. So I think one thing, just to sort of, that's why you might not see it on the video here, but I'm sprouting a lot of gray hairs. It is a scary piece of cover just because of the absolute breadth to it. If we start to unpack the cover provided itself, I find it easiest to explain as having three core pillars. The first is the incident response process, and this is serviced by an emergency 24/7 response hotline. I'm sure, as yourself and Richard would attest to, in the event of an incident, speed of response, getting on the ground, helping out, has a major impact on what the ultimate damages can be that are there. So this is kind of like your crisis line there to respond to it. What this gives you is access to the incident triage and recovery teams. So these are IT experts that are going to work with the insurance team or the Armata team to help identify what happened. How do we contain this? How do we regain control of the environment? And then get the business back up and running as quickly as possible, while also making sure that you're not inadvertently suffering further damages or having more data exposed, etc. As part of this process, you'll also kick off a forensic investigation process. So the forensic investigators will generate the images that they need so that they can then conduct a full forensic investigation afterwards. Excuse me. The forensic investigation becoming more important in light of where we mentioned the information regulator is starting to get a lot more involved in understanding what happens afterwards. So having this forensic investigation with evidence which has followed due chain of custody and care can now be utilized in defense with the regulator, and should there be any ensuing litigation down the road. Sorry, excuse me. They then also get legal guidance who will help to make sure that you don't fall foul of any of the regulatory requirements, as well as assist with notifications and representations to the regulator and dealing with these things and providing you guidance throughout the process. It's very easy to say or do something with the best of intentions, which might inadvertently be damaging to you down the road. So important to have this legal guidance throughout to make sure that you don't do that. Then you've got the PR component, and here you've got PR experts that will help you to minimize the potential reputational damage. You've got the cost to communicate with those who have been impacted, which is a requirement under POPI, and to provide them with remediation services. The most common remediation services that we see being utilized is credit and identity theft monitoring. So allowing the affected party to sign up and get proactive alerts if there's any activity on their credit record, allowing them to decline or close out those lines of credit before they now have the threat of being blacklisted or whatever the case may be, as well as in the dark web monitoring. So monitoring to see, has your data come up for sale on the dark web? And then you can take the proactive measures from there to try and prevent being a victim of, for example, fraud. We've also got the cyber extortion cover under this pillar. So what the policy does there is, step one, look to confirm the validity of an extortion demand. We have seen a big evolution on cyber extortion over the last couple of years, where it's gone from being focused around encrypting data to now having a bigger focus on actually stealing your data and holding you to ransom not to release or publish this data. So in these events, you'll want to validate that the hackers have got the information they claim to have. So the policy will then provide you with expert negotiators to try and get this sort of proof of life, if you would, to make sure that, yes, you do have what you have, and we need to look at paying this ransom. The next step would be to see if you can recover without paying the ransom, really more related to where your data has been encrypted. And in the past, we've been able to utilize tools to decrypt the data, for example. However, if it turns out that you can't recover and the best course of action will be to actually pay this ransom, the policy then extends to negotiate and settle the ransom demands as well as getting all the required regulatory clearances and OFAC clearances and stuff to make sure that any ransom payments do meet all of the requirements. Second pillar, this is really like a business impact pillar. What the policy provides here is your business interruption and increased cost of working. So your loss of revenue as a result of the disruption to your operations from a cyber incident, and your increased cost of working in getting back up and running and trading again. Important to note here that while you may already have insurance policies in place to cover business interruption, for example, your commercial insurance policies, those policies typically have a very strict cyber exclusion now, so won't be triggered by something like a denial of service attack or a ransomware attack. Excuse me. Or one that we've seen is a rogue employee who puts malicious code into the software, and after he's left employee of the company, causes all sorts of havoc within that business. The policy then's also got the fines and penalties, so like your POPI or your GDPR fines and penalties, with the caveat, though, that this is to the extent insurable by law. From a POPI perspective, POPI is still a little bit grey in certain areas and not yet clear as to whether or not as insurers we will legally be able to pay the fines and penalties. So policy caters for it as far as we legally are able to do so. What we've also now seen coming into the policies is your theft of funds. So this is where if a third-party hacker gains access into the environment of the insured and can steal money from their bank account or an account which they are legally responsible for, it covers that theft of funds. And one which is daunting but becoming more commonplace is your physical damage. So again, hacker gets access into the environment. He is able to cause physical damage to assets or property, which is becoming a bigger threat now with all the IoT devices, manufacturing concerns with remote monitoring capabilities, etc. This will then cover the repair replacement cost of that physical damage that has been caused. And then the final pillar is the liability pillar. And here you've got the defense and settlement of ensuing litigation as a result of data that may have been stolen from the environment, or where the environment has been compromised and has been used to then cause damages to another third party. So think I've broken in and now I'm sending out fraudulent mails, or you have remote access into environment, you utilize that to drop ransomware or steal data, for example. And at its heart, that is the core of a cyber insurance policy. Maybe to try and summarize it into a few quick sort of sentences as such. So it's got the three pillars. The incident response one is triggered first. It's got an emergency response hotline that will give you the IT experts to help you identify, contain, and recover, as well as conduct the forensic investigations. Legal to guide you through the process, make sure you don't fall foul of any regulatory requirements. PR to try and minimize reputational damage. Cost to communicate with those whose data has been compromised and provide them with remediation services to try and prevent them suffering further damages. Cyber extortion, which can extend as far as negotiating and settling the ransom demand. Then on the business impact pillar, you've got your loss of revenue as a result of this incident, as well as your increased cost of working and getting back up and running. Fines and penalties where we can do it. If money was stolen from your own account during the incident, the replacement of those funds. Physical damage, the repair or replacement on that side. And then finally, the defense and settlement of any litigation which could arise from that incident itself. One important add-on that I just want to quickly throw into that we see being purchased very often nowadays is your outsourced service provider, or OSP cover. So a lot of companies have started to move parts of their environment at least off to the cloud or utilizing third-party platforms and providers. This has created an operational dependence on their businesses to these third parties. With the outsourced service provider cover, you're able to extend benefits of your insurance policy to you should there be a compromise of one of these third-party providers.
That's very good. We've been chatting for quite a while, and I must say this is a good summary, a good reminder of what the cyber insurance policy is all about. And of course, it's relevant to us as a PTY, that's Armata, because we've obviously gone through the same process with you as a policyholder. Okay, I'm going to change this up a little bit. I know we've got one or two questions. I actually want to open it up to the audience to ask us questions. So, Lwanda, are you going to read a few questions? Then we're going to ask Richard or Ryan or myself to respond. Let's allow for a bit of an interaction, and that'll be in the next 50 minutes. Then I will close off with one more question to the panelists. Lwanda, maybe just choose a few questions that got your attention.
Hi, thanks, Caesar, and thanks to the team. There's one question I'd like to pose to Ryan. Examples of claims events that have occurred recently.
So I suppose the big ones that we're seeing a lot of is still the extortion. So we recently had an incident, and this was an interesting one because it was a development house, which you wouldn't always think was the biggest sort of cyber risk or exposure. They got broken into. Their source code was stolen from there and was then made available for sale on the dark web. It had a hefty ransom attached to it. I think we paid 9 million as the ransom demand on that. The big reason for this was the concern that this code could then be reverse engineered and used to attack the clients that it was being utilized at, which were some larger corporates. So the feeling was that, the implications of that were a lot bigger than what that ransom demand would be. So there the policy would have covered the investigation cost to determine how did the hackers get in, how do we regain control of the environment, validation of the data that they did have, notification to the regulator, the negotiation and settlement of that ransom demand, and now the ongoing monitoring on the dark web to make sure that that code has not actually come up for sale somewhere else. Business email compromises, we're seeing a lot of. So I would say we've seen probably 3 or 4 of those a week. Chatting to the forensic investigation and response teams, they're also seeing a number of these sorts of incidents. Unfortunately, people are fall victim to them. So please, I do ask that you be very vigilant when you are getting some form of change of bank account details or an email that seems out of the norm. We're seeing a lot of activity in that space. And that is, as I said earlier, the most common form of attack we're seeing. We have then seen, and there's been an uptick, I would say, over the last year and a half of employees acting in a malicious manner. I think this is related to where the economy's at. So people are struggling financially, which opens up the door for more of that sort of activity.
Thanks, Ryan. Next question, Lwanda. Maybe, Lwanda, are you there? Next question, please.
I'm here, Caesar. There is another question from Shirley. How do you know if you have paid the ransom that the attackers will not use the information that they've stolen?
$1 million question.
You don't. That's, I think, the biggest issue.
I mean, I just talked about exactly that. You have no guarantees. Ultimately, you are dealing with people who are ultimately criminals. So you have no absolute guarantee. From our side, I think we've been very lucky in that where we have paid the ransoms, we found that the hackers have been good to their word, interestingly. I do think there's a little bit of a psychology behind that. So I mentioned previously we need to go through a process of getting certain clearances before we pay a ransom, one of those being the OFAC clearance. That becomes a relatively small community. So if a hacking collective gets a reputation of being one who is going to publish the data whether or not you pay the ransoms, the OFAC guys are going to be aware of it, and they'll give you that sort of feedback to go, "Ooh, you can pay the ransom to these guys, but beware that this is how they've behaved in the past." For the hacking team, this means that they're a lot less likely to get paid their ransoms. So it's actually in their best interests to stick to their word. And if they have said that pay us the ransom, we won't pay, we won't publish, to then follow through on that. So they don't get the reputation of, oh, we may still publish it because then you're less likely to pay the ransoms. So no guarantees, but almost like market forces trying to hold the guys honorable.
So the one comment I've got to add to what Ryan is saying is that, so we've helped a particular client, this global manufacturing client that was hit by Lockbit. And the client didn't tell us whether they paid a ransom. Let's assume they did. They called us in to say, in spite of us now containing this, we want you to know if we've really locked this situation down, if they can harvest and further compromise. That's an important role that we play in this partnership, to really go and double check, triple check the controls are there, and they're much more advanced than what they were before the ransomware.
One thing I'd just like to add on to that, Caesar, and it's so we've seen it go wrong on a number of occasions, is to make sure that you get the right guys on the ground to help manage the incident after it's occurred. We've had incidents where insureds have maybe trying to avoid a deductible or try and keep the incident quiet, have utilized their own internal teams to try and resolve. And in one instance, we had a company where they pulled their disconnected backups, connected them into restore systems, but hadn't fully regained control of the environment. And no prizes for guessing what the hackers did. They then simply encrypted the backups, which left the client in a much more compromised position. So it is really, really vitally important that where you do have an incident, that you make sure you put in the right guys on the ground to try and minimize what the impact of that can be and get yourself back up and running as quickly as you can.
Fully agreed. Next question, please, Lwanda. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Sorry, I want to add on to that, Caesar. So we've actually seen a customer that's decided to do some of the digital forensic work on their own due to costs, and it's actually slowed down the entire process of resolving, to the point where they're now in trouble with the regulator because it's taken them too long to actually resolve the issue. So, I mean, if you've got cyber insurance in place, get a digital forensics team out there to help you as quickly as possible to mitigate, whatever the problem is, and get yourselves up and running. But you also need to troubleshoot and find out historically what actually happened, how it happened, and how you could prevent it from happening again. Because if you don't do that, again, you could be in trouble with the regulator, right? That's all about liability. It's all about, have you done the best that you can to mitigate and prevent from happening again? Paying a ransom, invariably you'll find, let's say you've got 10 servers, 8 of them have been encrypted, you pay the ransom, they give you the key, and unbeknownst to you, the other 2 servers that weren't encrypted are actually still, infected. And the minute you pay, you get reinfected again. You need to make sure that that virus is now gone from your environment completely. You need to make sure that you've got safeguards in place to prevent it from happening again. And the one trend that we have seen is when you do pay a ransom, you are more likely to get attacked very quickly after that, because the guys still have something in the environment that they can utilize to reinfect you again.
Thank you. Lwanda, give us your next question, please.
Yes, Caesar. Question maybe to you, Richard. What is the difference between a vulnerability assessment versus a penetration test? And then to you, Ryan, does iTOO, or actually both Ryan and the Armata team, do we offer any of these services?
So just to answer that, the vulnerability scan is predominantly looking for known vulnerabilities. So every vulnerability has a score, a CVE score, that kind of determines what the vulnerability is, how it can be utilized, to exploit. So in other words, could I gain remote access into the environment by exploiting that vulnerability? Penetration test looks not only for the vulnerabilities, but can we utilize that vulnerability to get further into the environment? All right. The difference between a penetration test, when we look for vulnerabilities, there is we're not just looking at a mistake in the code. We're looking at possibly things like an accidental backdoor to the system, right? So if you go do a vulnerability scan of a device and it says, I've got all of these bugs, these software bugs, and if you don't patch them, I can utilize that to get remote access. That's a vulnerability scan. A penetration test, I go look at the device and say, hold on, you've got these open ports, right? There's a RDP, remote desktop protocol port open that I can actually utilize. It's like a backdoor into the environment. It also looks at things like if I've gained access to the environment as a authenticated user, could I manipulate some of the requests as user A to pull information about user B? All right, and that's also not done in a vulnerability scan. So it's coming from the mind of a hacker. How do we get into environment and move around in the environment utilizing some mistake in the security of the product? I hope that answers the question correctly. There's a big difference in a vulnerability scan and a penetration test in pricing as well. And you'll find a lot of customers will say, you know, I need to have a penetration test done for some regulatory reason. In other words, I'm doing work with APSA or F&B, and they dictate I have to have a vulnerability scan done or a penetration test done. Make sure that when you do get the penetration test or the vulnerability scan done, that you are meeting the correct requirements, because there are two very different services, so to speak. Yes, we do offer both, and we can give you pricing on both. And Ryan as well, I know from the requirements for cyber insurance, there's a very big difference in your definition of regular vulnerability and patch management versus penetration testing on an annual or quarterly basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is one of the things that we scan or that we factor into on the costing, is how frequently penetration test is performed versus a vulnerability scan. As you said, penetration tests tend to be a lot more detailed and involved. Maybe Richard, one thing to just touch on a little bit would maybe be the black kite and those sort of posture assessments, almost like a subset of a vulnerability scan. But I think it's important just to talk through what that can do and what we're putting forward from our side.
Yeah, so I mean, the black kite solution basically looks at your exterior posture, not just from a vulnerabilities perspective, but also things like, you know, what is your reputation out there in the market? It has 4 lanes really that we look at as, you know, what are you doing to protect your external environment? What does that external footprint look like? So in other words, you've got email servers, you've got web servers, you've got a firewall. What is your reputation in the market? So if you're a company that loves to send out spam emails, people will start blacklisting you. They'll start adding you to hyper reputational services, so that when a solution like Mimecast sees mails coming from you, it'll automatically say this is spam and it'll block you, right? So we look at things like that. We look at information about leaked passwords. We've found sites. I mean, I was quite perturbed to see that an old airline that does not exist in this country anymore, their website was left operational for 10 years afterwards and was actually breached during that time. So there's now user information, PI information out there from this company that people probably aren't even aware of. So those are the types of scans that we do with the black kite. It's all information that's publicly accessible. It's not something that we, you know, it's not like a penetration test where we're trying to get through your defenses and look at the internal information. This is stuff that's publicly available to any threat actor, to any person with the right tools.
So it's what your external posture looks like, Richard?
Exactly what your external posture would look like. What's scary though is, I mean, you know, even from an email domain perspective, we can pick up, you know, business email compromises that have happened. We can pick up the risk of potentially being spoofed. In other words, somebody utilizing your business email to send mails to customers of yours pretending to be you. So it's again on a form of business identity theft, right? And there was that case already with that one law firm that was sued by a customer where she was told to pay 5.5 million rand into escrow for the transfer of property. Turned out it was actually a threat actor that sent her the invoice, and she successfully sued the law firm for not having the right protection in place to stop the business email compromise in the first place.
Yeah, there was a high-profile Cape Town incident.
Correct.
Okay, we'll take one more question, then we're going to close off. Thanks, Lwanda.
Sure. Question around generative AI. Does generative AI open new security risks through manipulation of this, and how do you go about detecting it? Example, manipulating purview or similar.
Okay, who's going to be brave enough to answer that one? Should we get a ChatGPT answer?
I was going to say, I'm going to take a first stab at it. So I think a lot of the tools that we have currently out there are starting to introduce AI controls in place for identifying other AI, right? So, for example, our email security solution, Mimecast, has introduced CyberGraph, which is an additional AI module, and it looks at things like typical behavior. So, for example, if I send a mail to Ryan about stuff related to iTOO, that's one thing. If I send to another Ryan that I deal with that same information, it will say, hold on, are you sure this is the Ryan that you want to send the information to? So it's picked up your email behavior characteristics and says, don't send to that Ryan, it's the wrong Ryan, right? That would be one example. The contents of the actual emails themselves, there's interesting things. I saw this with deep fakes. So they create a film that would look like I was talking to you, right? I mean, for all you know, I'm a deep fake. What the technology does is it starts looking at things like, you can see my skin's a little bit flushed, right? So it looks at like blood in the face to see if it's real or if it's AI generated. And customers are actually starting to say, do you have ways of detecting deep fakes in case I get this fake video call from our CEO saying, you need to pay this client urgently, they're screaming at us, blah, blah, blah. And you go and pay it, and it turns out it was a deep fake video, right? So I think the technology that we're starting to utilize, especially in the things like email security and endpoint detection and response, there's a lot more AI built into the product to detect the AI that it's fighting against, right? Because even with ChatGPT, as much as they got restrictions from writing scripts to hack, it's how you ask a question or how you phrase that question will get you the best results. If you straight up say to somebody, write me a script to hack the Pentagon, will say, I'm not allowed to do that. But if you say, hypothetically, if I were to, okay, you could probably get pretty good, accurate scripts that would achieve what you're trying to achieve. So the tools that we're using are now starting to look at those fakes and trying to pick up the points, the markers within that to identify that it is an AI-generated attack and not a legitimate mail.
So in our recent strat session breakaway as Armata management team, we have said in 2024, 2025, we're going on a serious innovation stream to look at what we need to do in the AI from a cybersecurity point of view, what offerings we need to provide to the market. So watch the space. Ryan, to conclude on that, then I'm going to close the session.
Yeah, I think Richard and yourself summarise it well. I think the key point there is, yes, AI is being utilised by a lot of perpetrators, but it can also be utilised in the defence. It's something which is not going anywhere. So to your point of being proactive to look at what tools we need to bring to try and defend against it is paramount, because the usage is just going to increase over time. It's not going anywhere. And it has got a potential to do a lot of good. So it's going to be interesting to see how that landscape evolves.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have come to the end of our 1 hour session. It's been most informative. I've certainly, as always, learned a lot from our esteemed panelists. And Lwanda, thanks very much for facilitating the questions from the audience. We really appreciate your participation. I think it's been